everyone. This is Avantika Singh from the McKelvey Group. Welcome to another episode of the TMG Expert Podcast Series. Today we have here Beth Goode, the Director of Price to Win from Richter Company. They're an industry leading company. Richter Company has successfully used many proven methodology and comprehensive tools to help clients win federal programs, ranging in size from a few million to over $30 billion. Beth is the director of Price to Win over there, and she has almost a decade of success and experience as a federal capture support professional, also with a focus on design engineering and strategy consulting. She possesses in-depth experience in the full range of business development activities, including solution development, costing, pricing specialist, competitive analysis, and Price to Win. So welcome, Beth. Please introduce yourself a little bit more, and we'll get right into it.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the show today. I'm excited to talk to you about Price to Win. I do have quite a bit of experience both as a competitive analyst and Price to Win analyst, as well as a background in design engineering focused on aviation. So
wow,
it's just a little more about me.
Perfect. And, I'm going to open with one of the questions that you and I both get on our sides of the capture process. What is the difference in this industry between Price to Win, competitive analysis, and pricing strategy?
Great question, and it's definitely important to understand the differences between those three things. So competitive analysis is really looking at understanding specific to an opportunity who you're going to be competing against. So who else might be bidding for the same RFP opportunity, and what solutions are they going to bring? What kind of staff are they going to have? So just really understanding what drives a company to go after a certain opportunity there. The next thing, though, is Price to Win, which is not only understanding who's going after it, but how they're going to go after it. So what potential pricing strategies could they use? How might they change their solution? How might they change the labor they're using in order to look more advantageous to the government? That creates a target. But the pricing strategy, which is what your firm does, that creates the actual strategies that our client can use to meet that target. So competitive analysis, Price to Win creates the target. Your company doing pricing strategy gets them to the target.
Wonderful. I'm so glad you explained that, because we get this question all the time from our clients, and I'm sure you do too, because we've talked about it many times. And, it is hard to sometimes explain that. But along those lines, typically, in your experience, how much time should a client plan for a Price to Win exercise for any given capture? For example, how far in advance of a project should the Price to Win exercise begin?
Well, there's definitely a difference between should and what companies actually do, but we'll go with what companies should do. And you should really start at least a year ahead of your opportunity. If it's something that's a must-win for your company, you need to understand what the size of the opportunity is. It gives you a long runway of time to really understand who might be going after the opportunity, attend the industry days, get closer to your customer, and watch as the market changes. And it allows you to start gathering data very early from a top-down perspective to understand what your customer's budget is actually going to be. Then once you get closer to your opportunity around the draft RFP stage, that's when you want to start doing your bottom-up build of the total evaluated price. If you can get that all completed before the draft RFP, it gives you a chance to understand the government's perspective, their acquisition strategy, and make some influences if you really need to make that opportunity more attractive for your company, to make your company in a better position. And then when the final RFP comes out, you do the final build-up again. That exercise can take a varying amount of time. If it's something that you're familiar with, you've done all of the pre-work, you can usually make that update to your draft RFP Price to Win in a couple of business days. If you've done absolutely no prep work, you're looking at least a week to 2 weeks, if not 3 or 4, depending on the complexity of your bid.
Well, that's great, because we also, pricing also requires a heads up and a lot of planning and preparation. So I'm glad that we're on the same page there, because a lot of times people leave these activities till the last minute.
All the time.
And they want you to come up with the magic 8 ball and solution it. So it's good to hear that your advice is also prepare. So along those lines, another question that we get often is, in a Price to Win exercise, what kind of information should a client typically gather prior to the start of the engagement?
Yeah. So if you know a little bit about your customer prior to the engagement, you really want to understand the total evaluated price, which is differentiated by what you're actually being awarded, which is different than how you'll actually perform. So you want to understand what components are going into the total evaluated price, and then just start pre-positioning information. If you're building a vehicle, you want to understand what is the weight of the vehicle, what materials are the vehicles made out of, where are they being manufactured, what kind of labor is doing the manufacturing, are you looking at different types of labor? You can start pre-positioning information like that so that you can then fit it into the structure that the government is looking for and make sure that you haven't missed any of the smaller details. And it gives you a lot of time to really research and flush that out versus trying to gather all of that last minute.
Right. And it sounds like it's a very integrated process with capture and proposals involved, teams involved. Yeah.
And having an independent perspective on that can also give you a different read on the RFPs or any of the draft documents, anything from industry day. Even just having a basic price point that you know you're shooting for is always nice before an RFP comes out or before you start trying to do it. So that's the type of information we are always looking for, especially things that differentiate our competitors. So where is the work being done? Do they have the correct type of facilities? Do they have the right facility clearances? Do they have any major capability gaps that would cause them to need subcontractors? All of that information, you don't need a full RFP to find,
Correct.
But it's time consuming. So waiting till the last minute, you're not going to have the fidelity that you need.
Correct. Yep, you're absolutely right. So this is a little challenging, the next question, because we get it sometimes in our lane as well. And we've got experience with this. I'm sure you do too. Have you ever had, a client argue with your independent data? In other words, have you had a client hire you for more for validation than just for independent analysis?
Yeah, and it's definitely my worst nightmare almost to be on a call and not realize that they've done an independent price twin. It's a little bit scary as an analyst, but I genuinely welcome any kind of question or pushback on my assumptions because I'm doing this independently. I'm trying to provide a different perspective, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we're getting consensus and providing data that's actually useful. So I do get it where it's a validation exercise, and I don't mind that at all. Again, it's a little scary, but I think that can be one of the most useful ways to use a price to win, to have multiple data points.
Correct.
I create a price to win by finding and validating my data multiple ways. I think that's the best way for a company to come up with their own pricing strategy, multiple data points, validating them, coming to a consensus about why one strategy would work better than another.
That's a great point because a lot of times your pricing team or your capture team is so ingrained with the solution, they're not going to be unbiased by the time they come up with the final approach. And I think what you offer is an unbiased approach, looking at it externally, looking at the market, looking at your competitors, and it's not just drinking your own bathwater. So that helps.
It's absolutely true. And I think, too, a lot of times companies, when they do their own internal pricing or even price to win, they're going on historical data that they have in their database. They're going on the information that their subcontractors and suppliers are giving them. I'm never going to have the depth of information that they have available. So my approach comes from a very different way where I'm looking at cost estimating methodologies. I'm looking at what is industry best practice. And so I think it doesn't make me always the most, accurate down to the penny, but it absolutely provides some innovative ways that they can look at their strategies that they wouldn't otherwise see.
That's a great sort of segue into my next question because I wanted to ask you, how do you account for innovations in determining your price to win approaches?
Yeah, so we're always looking to make sure that we understand where the market is going and where the market could possibly be going. And in order to account for that, we look for as much pricing that's available. We usually try to identify subject matter experts that are a lot closer to the technologies than we are. But when all of that doesn't work out or we can't find it, we go to industry best practices for cost estimating that allow us to use mathematical equations that have been tried and true to cost estimate what the innovation would look like from, an engineering perspective, a manufacturing perspective, that sort of thing.
Well, that's good because a lot of times people don't understand that and they think it's just a spreadsheet, right?
Yes.
So typically when they engage with you, what will they get as the end product from you? Is it a summary? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it a report? What do you guys
Well, we like to put it all out there.
Good.
So again, one of those, it's a bit of a scary moment as an analyst because you're completely exposed. But for our clients, it's really a great tool that they get to take home. So in general, we build up everything bottom up, all of the detail, every single assumption in a giant Excel model. I think my last one had 57 tabs.
Wow.
I consistently crash my laptop because they're extensive, but we want to make sure that all that data is captured. And so when we do a delivery, we'll go over high-level assumptions, but then ultimately our clients get the full spreadsheet and they can play around with it if they want to see a different scenario, if they want to play some games. It allows them to change that data and really see where everything is coming from, down to the direct hourly labor rate all the way through any kind of material pricing that we've done to fee. So that's our typical deliverable, is a full set of Excel models and a PowerPoint.
Okay, great. So, and then I'm sure you do follow-ups and...
Oh, absolutely. We do cradle to grave. So it's not just when the RFP is turned in, it's once the RFP is turned in through any final proposal revision questions to post-award review if that's something our client is interested in.
That's great, because a lot of times there are FPRs, final proposal division. There's baffle rounds, and then there's basically sometimes the acquisition completely changes and they cancel and reissue it, and so the landscape changes. So it's good to know, I'm sure, for our clients, for all of the industry, that is not a one-day exercise. It's iterative hand-holding for a long period, as long as it's going on, the proposal itself. So another kind of direction I'm going to go into is what are you noticing as different approaches to price to win? Are there different approaches for price to win for different program types or acquisition types, like shipbuilding versus, computer, IT contracts?
Yeah, absolutely. There are different approaches. I mean, the process is pretty much always the same. Read the RFP, understand what the requirements are, and then form a plan on how you're going to build up the price. That's always the same. That doesn't change no matter what kind of project I get. I always start from the same place. But in terms of technique, if I'm doing something that is shipbuilding, I'm going to have to use a totally different kind of tool versus doing a staffing plan for software development, which is a different tool than doing program management type staffing. Mm-hmm. So there are different tools that can be used. A lot of them go back to proprietary models that we've built internally based on industry standard data and cost estimating relationships, versus using some, more high-level pricing software that's industry proven for areas where our models are not necessarily going to have the same backup data. Mm-hmm. Other approaches might also include pulling in subject matter experts that have significantly more historical data than what we do. The end result is always trying to get our clients the most accurate data to help form their strategy. So that answer was really bad.
I mean,
sorry.
It's fine.
Maybe we come back to that one. I'll think that one through again.
Charlie will edit it out. So you just mentioned that you have subject matter experts that you can pull in usually for different types of approaches. Typically, when someone's looking to join your team, what sort of skill sets do they have to have? Are they financial people, accountants, or economists, or engineers? What's the typical price to win analyst at Richter & Co.?
Well, we don't really have a specific type. I always look for someone that's enthusiastic. If you've ever read an RFP or attempted to read an RFP, I would love to say that they're super fun, but in actuality, they're like 300 pages of garble in federal government language that can be a little bit confusing. There's the FAR that lists everything in just really detailed language. So I always look for someone that's enthusiastic and really wants to learn. The rest of their background, to me, doesn't necessarily matter as long as they can be somewhat proficient in Excel and understand basic mathematical equations, because in reality, every single program is so different. Mm-hmm. If you're excited to learn, you like new things, to me, that's pretty much enough to be a price to win analyst.
That's great. And I'm sure that a lot of the skills have to do with how analytical they are.
It does. I do say, I'm an engineer myself. One of our other analysts is also an engineer. So I think that there's a part of engineering that really fits well with price to win, because you learn how to break things down, understand all those elements of cost, and then build them back up. And I definitely think understanding analysis is really important. It's one thing to research all the data, but if you have it in front of you and you can't tell a story out of it, it's not really as useful. So
right. I think that's very critical, because you are telling a story. You are trying to come up with an approach and sell that idea to the capture team, saying this is the range, this is how our assumptions are, this is what it looks like, we've analyzed the data, here you go, this is what our recommendation is. So great. I mean, that looks like you hired talented analytical sort of people, but they don't necessarily have to be accountants or financial people, which is great.
In fact, I'm not sure that any of us have a direct finance background. I think most of us come from working in industry and understanding proposals, but then really just enjoying the mathematical analysis that goes along with it, as well as the innovation, art and science mix that Price to Win really is. And ultimately, it's about singing a song to your client. Randy, when he listens to this, will totally laugh at that line. But through all of our analysis, all we want to be able to do is tell a story and sing a song about what is going on in industry and how we can make recommendations to our clients so that they are the most attractive for a win.
Great. So this leads me to our, last question and the topic of the day, really. Everybody's asking now, what kind of trends are you seeing in industry in today's government contracting marketplace?
So I think the most obvious that most people are seeing, but I think it's important to note why and how it's changing, is that we're finally moving away from lowest price, technically acceptable procurements. This started probably 5 or so-ish years ago when we really started seeing a lot of budget constraints. We went through sequestration where the government just simply didn't have the money to buy quick reaction items anymore because they had spent so much money in the decade prior to that. So they came up with low price technically acceptable, and that drove contractors to really pull all the stops out and bring their prices down as low as possible. It was basically a race to the bottom versus actually understanding what the cost of things are. And a lot of companies didn't fare very well. The ultra-competitive nature of the field became very difficult to navigate. And ultimately, the government wasn't able to get what they needed from a resource perspective. And there are situations where low price technically acceptable is perfectly fine. But there are other, especially with development contracts or highly classified work, where that's just not gonna fly. And finally, last year, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2017 provided a lot more direction on how to use LPTA, and it more clearly defined acquisition areas where that was appropriate. And so now we're seeing that contracting officers are getting a lot smarter about the type of acquisition they should be running. They're working a lot harder with industry to make sure that they're putting together requirements that are actually achievable and affordable for our government. And they're introducing some new acquisition types, specifically the value-added total evaluated price, where you have an incentive as a contractor to add requirements, and then you get an incentive on the total evaluated price, but you don't have to add that. So in essence, you don't have to jack up your price to add a capability if that's not the most advantageous thing for the government.
Well, that's a great soundbite because, people will get a lot out of that question alone. That's amazing that you've kind of outlined it and recalled that memo, because I agree with that. I myself am starting to see the pendulum slowly swing back. I personally still think it'll take about 2 to 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
Is that your assessment too?
Oh, I think it's still going to take a while because even though there's this act that came out and directs it, there's still, I think, almost an inherent nature, even personally. When I go to the grocery store, I want the cheapest quality item, and sometimes the cheapest acceptable item is totally fine with me, and I have that mentality that I always want to be saving money. I'm not going to change out of that immediately just because there's a memo telling me I'm allowed to or I should. So I do think it's going to take some time, but I think this at least gets the ball rolling and gets people in the customer side of things, and hopefully in industry too, to start thinking along those lines that sometimes it is necessary to have a cost capability trade-off versus just going with the cheapest possible option. I'd say another trend I'm seeing is I think people are getting a lot smarter about how they price. They're starting to really understand some of the mechanisms that they can use. Price to Win has become much more popular. I think it's becoming part of the best practices, both internally and using external consultants when doing the capture process and making smarter decisions. And I think that's something we're going to see a big trend in. Just because your company is interested in an opportunity doesn't mean that you should absolutely bid. It may not fit or align with business goals. And I think that's a trend that we're starting to see in the marketplace. Companies settling back into the idea that they can focus on their core company personality and core capabilities versus, again, going back where we didn't have a lot of budget, going after everything they could possibly see, even if it wasn't the right fit. And so I do see that as a trend going forward as well.
Yeah, I would echo that. You're absolutely spot on. I'm seeing the same trend. So great minds think alike. I just like to take credit for everything. But with that, I really want to thank you for your time, and I hope this pattern sticks and the industry starts correcting itself eventually for all our clients' sakes, right? Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for
this was a
having me.
Great podcast.
Fantastic.
You're welcome anytime.